turn this thing around for Ole Miss, and you look at where the Rebels have needs. I think, there's a 1A, 1B, right? And you can decide the order, but it's linebacker and wide receiver.
Ooh, I'll throw a wild card at you that I think is actually priority one.
Okay.
Offensive line. And that's kind of a cop-out because the trenches, joking aside, they are the most important thing. But I think if you just look at Ole Miss's offense from numbers, it doesn't tell the whole story about them up front. Led the SEC in rushing, had the SEC's leading rusher, and Dart was sacked, 4 times? A lot of that had to do with his mobility in the pocket and awareness, though. And they're possibly losing multiple guys on the offensive line anyway. So you're losing people, and it was a unit that there's a reason that Lane Kiffin was pushing his offensive line coach out the door, and I'm sure he's thankful for Hugh Freeze for taking him off his hands. That unit could have been much better, should have been much better, and limited them in the bigger games. LSU, they got dominated up front. Alabama didn't have enough time to really get the passing game going. Mississippi State owned them up front. Absolutely flat out owned Ole Miss's offensive line. They have got to get better there if they're going to be better next season first before anything else, to me.
So do you think the offensive lineman from Alabama is at the absolute top of Ole Miss's priority list?
If they think he can play, yeah, I assume so.
He was second team All-SEC.
So obviously the coaches think he can play. You wonder, this stuff turns fans off. I love it. It's fascinating to me. It adds a layer to college football that makes it more interesting after the games are over. You've got to, if you're them, figure out what he's asking for and if he's worth what he's asking for. Or if you can find an offensive tackle from lesser school that's asking for lesser amount of money that you think is an equally talented player. So that's a new layer that's been added to this. Well, just go get that kid from Alabama. Pay him whatever you want. No, you don't want to do that because your war chest for Ole Miss is huge for what people think of you.
Well, and think about it this way, right? There were 2 players that came in last year for Ole Miss through the transfer portal that Ole Miss thought were going to be contributors. Troy Brown, linebacker, coming from the MAC, good as advertised. If he stays healthy the entire season, his numbers would have been even better. But I don't know where Ole Miss is at the linebacker spot without Troy Brown.
And he was exceptional when healthy in the Egg Bowl. That was probably his best game. He was great.
Yeah, played really, really well. But the other one was Mason Brooks, offensive lineman who didn't get used a whole lot. Now, there are people that say there may be some backstory there as well. But 2 group of 5 guys. One comes in, you plug him in, he's a starter, he's a playmaker. Another comes in, and it's like, okay, SEC offensive line.
Got beat out by a redshirt freshman.
And if you've got a redshirt freshman and a 1-year senior transfer who are either equal or close to equal, you play the redshirt freshman for lots of reasons. Mike in Oxford sends us a message. He says the wish list for Ole Miss is 1 quarterback, 3 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, 2 offensive linemen, 3 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, a corner, and a safety.
Sounds about right, honestly. When you talk about, I know, but that's everybody. It's a next layer of recruiting, and the beauty of Ole Miss and Mississippi State too. I think this applies to them. Is you're portaling from a position of relative strength.
Yeah,
Ole Miss is not desperate with that list. It's guys that they need to add to be a good team next year, but it's not like, oh my God, if they don't get a running back, then they are screwed. It's not really like that. Because they have enough pieces returning on next year's team that should be good with some portal additions. I would say the same thing about Mississippi State. It's a different circumstance because it's a new coach and a transition. Auburn's desperate to get players. They are desperate to not only get players in the portal, but they have to be good right away, all of them, or else they're going to struggle next year. It's not the same case over here. So that looks like a long list, but in reality, these teams in our state have relative strength when they go portaling.
I don't understand stuff sometimes, right? Dante Dowdle, star from Picayune, has been committed to Oregon since 2022. Looking at his profile on 24/7 Sports. So you guys got to help me understand this. There are two crystal ball predictions. One is by Chris Brooks, one is by David Johnson. They both have him crystal ball predicted to Ole Miss, even though he is listed as a hard commit to Oregon and has been since May of last year. Does that mean they know something we don't know? Is that the rumor in the recruiting world? What are we doing
with
here?
Dowdle, it's a prediction. They predict him to flip. I mean, I don't know when they made those predictions either. I don't know if they have the dates on there or not.
No, I don't see
But the thing with Dowdle's situation is this. Grew up a huge State fan, but you know Picayune, right? They throw the ball maybe twice a year. So there was a long evaluation process for State on that. Like, can he play in this offense? State didn't offer him until late October. And I think that muddied the waters a little bit. I think State's in it for him, but I do think Ole Miss would, if he stays in State, I think he would go to Ole Miss as it is today. But he might just stick with Oregon. So, good player, though. Really good player. If Mullen or Moorhead were still the coach at State, he would have been one of their earliest commits.
It looks like both of those predictions were made late April before he committed in mid-May, and they have not been
The Oregon
changed.
commitment was a little bit of a surprise when it happened. I do recall that.
Yeah.
And Ole Miss is going to keep going after him, especially
they're going to recruit him the whole way through.
As they wait on Zach Evans, which I expect him to declare too. But
even if he keeps Zach Evans, you're going to recruit this kid.
Yeah,
he's too good to let go.
I'm wondering about the running back position, right? I mean, if the opportunity to get a guy like Zach Evans presents itself, you absolutely 100% go get Zach Evans. But when you see what Quinshon Judkins did as a true freshman, is that a position where you maybe focus more of your efforts on high school than you do the transfer portal? And see, to me, that's the fascinating balance, right? When you look, it's like, okay, when we're talking about needs, what do we need that is plug and play through the transfer portal, and what do we need that is helping build depth on the overall roster, hoping those guys can play and hoping that they are willing, if they don't play in year one, to spend a couple of years developing and not just immediately jump into the transfer portal.
Well, and now you're seeing it's kind of risky to go all in on high school guys because if a lot of them are getting really bad advice. Let's be honest, they're getting bad advice. Guys, a couple of portal additions from Ole Miss, for example, to use a local example, guys that hadn't played much because they're young and they're not physically ready to play their positions at the SEC level, hit the portal because they weren't playing. It's bad advice. So if you go all in on a high school class and sign a bunch of high school kids, most of them aren't ready to play in the SEC as freshmen. They got a bad actor in their life that wants them to go chase dollars instead of develop and get better. You lose these players. So it's when people say there's risk in the portal, at this point, there's risk in all of it because your high school kids are leaving too if they don't play immediately.